The air was thick with pride and anticipation as families filled the auditorium. Cheers echoed off the walls, balloons floated above chairs, and cell phones were held high, ready to capture one of life's biggest milestones, graduation day. Among the crowd sat Sergeant Major Elijah Brooks, dressed in his full Marine uniform. His spine was straight, his gaze focused on the stage, but his hands trembled slightly. Today, his only son, Malcolm, would walk across that stage. Elijah had served this country for over 25 years, including 3 tours overseas. He'd faced combat zones, survived explosions, and rescued comrades under fire. But nothing prepared him for this moment, the one where he'd finally see his boy graduate high school, something he himself had never done. But not everyone saw Elijah as a proud father. 2 security guards standing by the auditorium's entrance had noticed him the moment he walked in. They whispered, pointed, and now they were approaching with sharp eyes and rigid postures. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us," one of them said. Standing over him, Elijah looked up, puzzled. "Why? I'm here for my son's graduation." The other guard leaned in, lowering his voice. "We've had a few concerns from attendees. Your presence in uniform, it's causing a distraction." Elijah's eyebrows pulled together. "You're asking a Marine to leave his son's graduation because of my uniform?" "No, sir," the first one said quickly. "It's not just the uniform. Some folks said you don't belong here, said you were making them uncomfortable." He didn't need to guess what that meant. Elijah was the only black man in his row, maybe the only one in the section. And while his years in the military taught him to pick his battles, this wasn't one he'd let slide. Still, with every eye in the room slowly turning his way, Elijah stood up quietly. He didn't want to ruin his son's big day, but just as the guards reached for his arm, the auditorium doors opened again. 4 men walked in, broad, calm, commanding. Their suits were sharp, but their posture screamed Navy SEAL. And the second they saw Elijah, they stopped in their track. Then everything changed. The 4 men moved with purpose, silent, direct, and impossible to ignore. Their presence shifted the entire energy of the room. Whispers rippled through the audience as the men walked toward Elijah and the 2 guards. They didn't need introductions. The way they carried themselves, the way people instinctively moved aside, it was clear these weren't ordinary guests. The lead SEAL, a tall man with a scar down his cheek and a presence like steel, stepped in between Elijah and the guards. "Is there a problem here?" His voice was low but carried through the space like a warning bell. The first guard straightened. "Sir, we're just handling a situation. This gentleman was making some people uncomfortable." The SEAL looked the guard dead in the eye. "You mean this Marine? The one who bled for the flag flying outside this building?" Elijah tried to interject, not wanting to escalate things. "It's all right, fellas. I don't want any trouble. I was just here to watch my son walk." But the second SEAL shook his head. "You didn't serve half your life to be walked out of a high school auditorium like a criminal." The third SEAL turned to the audience, who were now watching the scene unfold in stunned silence. "Let's be real clear. That man he pointed to. Elijah is the reason half of us get to sit here in peace." One of the guards started to say something, but the 4th SEAL cut him off. "You ever tell a decorated Marine to leave his son's graduation again, and we'll make sure your next post is parking lot duty in the middle of a thunderstorm." The principal, having heard the commotion from backstage, rushed over, his face pale. "Gentlemen, what seems to be the issue?" Elijah stood tall. "They were about to throw me out for wearing the same uniform I wore in Kabul." The principal turned a shade whiter. "That's unacceptable. Sergeant Major Brooks, please have the front row. It's an honor to have you here." The audience erupted into applause, but none louder than Malcolm, who had just taken the stage and seen the whole thing unfold. His tassel hadn't even been flipped yet, and already his father had taught him a lesson more powerful than any diploma ever could. Elijah moved to the front row, every eye in the auditorium following him. The principal himself guided him to the seat, clearing it with a quick nod to another guest who offered it without hesitation. Elijah gave a polite nod, his jaw tight, his emotions swirling. He hadn't asked to be the center of attention, he'd only wanted to quietly witness his son's moment. But now, that moment was shared by everyone. On stage, Malcolm stood frozen for a second, scanning the crowd. His eyes locked with his father's, and Elijah gave him a small, proud nod. Malcolm straightened his shoulders, more confident than ever. The announcer called his name Malcolm Elijah Brooks. Cheers broke out as Malcolm walked across the stage. But this time, they weren't just for another graduate. They were for the son of the Marine who had just reminded everyone what honor really looked like. After the ceremony, people surrounded Elijah's parents who had sat quietly before now shook his hand. One older woman pressed a hand to her heart and said, "Thank you for your service and for standing tall." A teacher came up in tears, apologizing for what happened, saying she'd worked at the school for 20 years and had never been more embarrassed by her own staff. But not everyone was supportive. The two guards lingered near the back, speaking quietly into their radios, clearly annoyed at being overruled. One of them shot Elijah a glare, as if the incident had somehow embarrassed him. Just then, the lead SEAL returned, stepping beside Elijah like an old friend. "You all right?" he asked. "I've been through worse," Elijah replied with a wry smile. The SEAL chuckled. "Still, shouldn't have to go through this at home, especially not on a day like today." Elijah nodded. "You didn't have to step in, you know." The SEAL placed a hand on his shoulder. "We always step in. That's what brothers do." Just then, Malcolm joined them, still in his gown. He didn't say anything at first, just threw his arms around his dad and held tight. The crowd around them quieted as the two embraced. "You okay, son?" Elijah asked softly. Malcolm pulled back, eyes glassy. "I am now." The moment hung heavy in the air. But before Elijah could respond, a sharp voice rang out from the back of the auditorium. "This isn't over," one of the guards muttered aloud, stepping forward. But what he didn't know was who else had just walked into the room. The temperature in the room seemed to drop the moment that voice cut through the buzz. "This isn't over," the guard's words echoed, cold and careless. Heads turned, the crowd's cheers fading into murmurs. Even the principal froze mid-conversation, but then the doors at the back creaked open again. Two men entered, both in full dress blues, their ribbons and medals gleaming under the gymnasium lights. Behind them, a woman in a Department of Defense blazer followed, her expression unreadable. The room instinctively stood straighter. These weren't just military, they were brass. The taller officer stepped forward. "Is there a Sergeant Major Elijah Brooks here?" Elijah raised a hand, surprised. "That's me," the officer offered a crisp salute. "Sir, on behalf of the United States Armed Forces and the Secretary of the Navy, we extend our sincerest apology for what occurred today." The gym went silent. The two guards turned stiffly, realizing just how badly they'd misjudged the situation. "We were notified of an incident involving discrimination and misconduct toward one of our own," the officer continued. "We're here to ensure accountability and, more importantly, respect." The woman from the Department of Defense stepped forward now. "The behavior of these school security guards doesn't just reflect poorly on this institution, it disrespects every man and woman who wears the uniform." The second guard's mouth opened, then shut, clearly struggling. The first tried to explain, "We didn't mean." But the SEAL who had backed Elijah earlier raised a hand. "Save it, Malcolm," still standing next to his father, looked between the officials and the guards. "So what happens now?" The DoD woman replied, "There will be a formal investigation, and these men will be placed on administrative leave, effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the room. The guards stiffened. One of them began protesting, but it was drowned out by the sound of clapping. Slow, respectful applause. It began in the front row and spread throughout the gym. Elijah didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just placed a hand on his son's shoulder and looked ahead at the stage, the flag, and the future his son now stood ready to face. But outside the building, a black SUV idled by the curb. Inside sat someone watching, someone who had been waiting for this day, not for the graduation, but for Elijah.